They told us we came from nothing and would return to nothing. But on the morning of March 14th, 1938, when Mrs. Grimshaw read
How
aloud the
dare you
letter from a
defy me
lawyer in
after
Kentucky,
everything I've
23
done for
children in
you?
the dormitory laughed at
You
us.
will do as
Even the
I
youngest
say.
ones, even the ones who usually cried themselves to sleep. They laughed because it was easier to laugh at us than to think about their own futures. My name is Thea Whitmore. I was 18 years old that morning. My sister Opal was 13 and she was dying. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, breath by breath, her lungs were failing her. The asthma had started when she was 7. Every year it got worse. Every winter I would lie awake listening to her wheeze in the girl's wing across the hall, wondering if this would be the night she stopped breathing altogether. Mrs. Grimshaw stood at the front of the common hall, with her steel gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent expression of disapproval. She held the lawyer's letter between two fingers like it was something contaminated, like it might infect her with foolish hope. "Well, Whitmore," she said, looking at me with those cold eyes that had watched over my childhood like a hawk watches a mouse. "It seems even the dead can play cruel jokes on the living." She paused for effect. She always paused for effect. "A cave. Your great-aunt Josephine left you a cave." The laughter swelled around us. 23 children in identical gray uniforms, their faces twisted with the kind of cruelty that comes from being powerless and finding someone even more powerless to mock. I understood them. I had been one of them once before I learned that cruelty was just fear wearing a different mask. But Opal tugged at my sleeve. Her breath was shallow that morning, her lips slightly blue at the edges, the color that haunted my nightmares, the color that meant her lungs were losing another battle. "Thea," she whispered, and I had to lean down to hear her over the laughter. "Caves have constant temperatures, around 55 degrees. The air is clean, filtered through limestone." She paused to catch her breath. Even whispering cost her something. It would be good for my lungs. I looked down at her pale face, at the dark circles under her eyes that made her look decades older than 13, at the way her chest rose and fell with such effort like she was climbing a mountain with every breath. And something shifted inside me. Not hope exactly. Hope was too gentle a word for what I felt. It was more like a door opening, a door I had not even known existed, a door that led somewhere other than the gray walls and cold oatmeal, an endless grinding certainty of a life I did not choose. "We're going," I said quietly. Opal blinked up at me. "What? We're going to Kentucky. We're going to find that cave." Mrs. Grimshaw was still talking, still mocking, but I had stopped listening. My mind was already racing ahead, calculating. How much money did I have hidden in the lining of my mattress? $47. Saved over 11 years from the pennies I had earned doing extra chores, from the coins I had found in coat pockets when sorting donations, from the birthday money that a kind church volunteer had given me, once $3, that I had hidden so carefully. Mrs. Grimshaw never found it. $47. It was not much, but it might be enough. That night I could not sleep. I lay in my narrow bed in the girls' wing, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and thought about the 11 years we had spent in this place. I was 7 when our mother died. Tuberculosis took her slowly, cruelly, the way it took so many mothers in those years. She coughed blood for 3 months, growing thinner, growing paler, her cheeks hollowing out until she looked like a stranger wearing my mother's face. And then one gray November morning, she simply did not wake up. I remember the color of her lips, like wet ash. I remember Opal, only 2 years old, reaching for her and crying without understanding why Mama would not open her eyes. I remember the silence in our small apartment, the terrible silence that meant something had ended that could never begin again. Our father lasted 2 more years, but he did not die. He just left, walked out the back door of our rented house in Columbus one Tuesday afternoon, and never came back. No note, no explanation, no goodbye, just the sound of the screen door closing, and then nothing. Nothing at all. I was 9 years old. Opal was 4. I waited by the window for 5 days watching for him, believing that fathers came back, believing that love meant something. I did not eat. I did not sleep. I just watched the street and waited. The neighbors finally called someone. A woman in a gray coat came to our door. She smelled like lavender and bureaucracy. She told us we were going somewhere safe. And so we came to Thornwood Home for Unwanted Children. The name told you everything you needed to know. The boys slept in one wing, the girls in another. But we all ate the same cold oatmeal and learned the same bitter lessons about being unwanted. We learned to keep our eyes down. We learned to scrub floors until our knuckles cracked. We learned that fresh air was a luxury we had not earned, that questions were dangerous, that hope was a trap for fools. 11 years. 11 years of cold oatmeal and colder beds. 11 years of watching Opal grow sicker while Mrs. Grimshaw told us that specialized care was expensive and we were not worth the expense. 11 years of stealing every book I could get my hands on because books were the only escape that did not require money or permission. Science textbooks from donation bins, old agricultural pamphlets from the church basement, a water-stained copy of the Practical Naturalist's Guide that I hid under my mattress like contraband. Mrs. Grimshaw hated my reading. She called it vanity. She said girls who read too much got ideas, and ideas in girls like us were as dangerous as matches in a hayloft. She was not entirely wrong about the danger, because the moment I heard the words sealed limestone cave, something ignited inside me. Not a match, a furnace. I decided right then, lying in that narrow bed with my sister, wheezing somewhere in the girls' wing, that we would leave Thornwood and never come back. The next afternoon, I made a decision that would change everything. I was in the hallway outside Mrs. Grimshaw's office, waiting to be called in for my weekly progress evaluation, which was really just Mrs. Grimshaw telling me all the ways I had failed to be grateful enough for the charity of the state. But Mrs. Grimshaw was not alone. Through the crack in the door, I heard another voice, a man's voice. Dr. Brennan, the physician who visited once a month to check on the sicker children. The children like Opal. The younger Whitmore girl is getting worse. His voice was low, clinical, the voice of a man discussing numbers, not a child. Her lung capacity has decreased significantly since my last visit. If we don't intervene soon, I'm not sure she'll survive another winter. My blood turned to ice in my veins. And what do you suggest I do about it? Mrs. Grimshaw's voice was sharp, impatient. We don't have the resources for specialized care. The state allocation barely covers food and clothing. There's a facility in Columbus, the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. They have a ward for children with respiratory conditions. They could provide the care she needs. A long pause. I pressed closer to the crack, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. An asylum, Mrs. Grimshaw's voice dripped with something that might have been relief. You mean an asylum? That's what it really is, isn't it? A place where they send children who can't work, can't contribute, can't justify the cost of keeping them alive. Mrs. Grimshaw, that's not entirely. She would receive a bed and 3 meals a day until she dies, which by your own estimation won't be long, and I would be rid of the burden of her and her troublesome sister. I stopped breathing. The older one turns 18 next month, Mrs. Grimshaw continued. I can discharge her then. She's too headstrong anyway. Always reading, always questioning, always looking at me like she knows something I don't. But the younger one, I can have her transferred to Waverly Hills by the end of the week. Mrs. Grimshaw, the transfer process requires final, Dr. Brennan. Her voice was cold. Final. The voice of a woman who had made up her mind and saw no reason to consider alternatives. Make the arrangements. I want her gone by Saturday. I stood frozen in that hallway, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs, my hands shaking against the wall, my mind racing through the implications of what I had just heard. They were going to separate us. They were going to send Opal to a sanatorium. A place where sick children went to die alone, surrounded by strangers, forgotten by the world that had already forgotten them once. I would not let that happen. That night at 3 o'clock in the morning, I crept to the girls' wing and woke Opal. Don't talk, I whispered. Just get dressed. We're leaving. To her credit, Opal did not ask questions. She simply nodded, her eyes wide in the darkness, and began pulling on her clothes with trembling hands. She trusted me. She had always trusted me. I was the only person in her world who had never let her down. I could not let her down now. I had packed 2 small bags the night before, hidden them under my bed where even Mrs. Grimshaw's inspections had never found my books. A change of clothes for each of us. My precious books, 3 of them, all I could fit. The $47 sewn into the lining of my coat where no one would think to look. A photograph of our mother, the only one we had worn soft at the edges from being held too many times. We crept through the building, past the creaking floorboards I had memorized over 11 years. I knew which boards squeaked. I knew which shadows hid the blind spots in the hallway. I knew this building the way a prisoner knows her cell. We slipped out through the kitchen door, the one with the broken lock that Mrs. Grimshaw had never bothered to fix because she believed no one would ever try to leave. And then we were outside. The March air was cold, sharp. It cut through our thin coats like knives made of ice. Opal immediately began to cough that terrible wet sound that meant her lungs were struggling. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. 8 miles to the bus station, I said. It did. Well, can you make it? She looked up at me with those gray-green eyes that were so much like our mother's. Eyes that held fear and trust in something else. Something that might have been hope. I can make it, she said. We walked. The journey to Kentucky took 3 days. 3 days that tested everything I thought I knew about myself. 3 days that showed me who I really was when everything familiar fell away. On the first day, Opal's cough got worse. The cold air of Ohio in March was brutal on her lungs. She tried to hide it from me, tried to keep walking, tried to pretend she was fine. But I could hear her breathing changing, becoming shallower, becoming more labored. We caught a Greyhound bus at dawn. I paid for 2 tickets to Lexington with money I had been saving for 11 years. The ticket seller looked at us strangely. 2 young girls traveling alone, but he took the money and asked no questions. On the bus, Opal fell asleep against my shoulder. I watched the landscape change through the dirty window. Ohio farmland, rolling hills, small towns with white churches and empty main streets. A world I had only read about in books, suddenly real outside my window. On the second day, Opal developed a fever. Her forehead burned against my hand. Her breathing became shallow and fast like a bird's heartbeat. Her lips took on that blue tinge that terrified me, that color that meant her body was not getting enough oxygen. I held her on the bus while passengers stared and whispered. I told them she was just tired, just sleeping. I smiled at them with a smile that felt like a mask, and they eventually looked away. By the third day, she was barely conscious, leaning against me on the Greyhound bus as it wound through the mountains of eastern Kentucky. Her skin pale and clammy, her breath coming in small, desperate gasps. In a small town in West Virginia, I did something I had never done before. I stole. The pharmacy was on Main Street, a small shop with a bell above the door and wooden shelves lined with brown bottles. I left Opal on a bench outside propped against a lamppost and walked in with my heart hammering in my chest. The pharmacist was an older man with kind eyes and silver spectacles. He was helping another customer, a woman with a crying baby. He did not notice me slip past the counter. I moved quickly. My hands were shaking. My breath was too fast. Everything in me screamed that this was wrong, that stealing was a sin, that good girls did not take things that did not belong to them. But I thought of Opal dying on that bench outside. I thought of the sanatorium they wanted to send her to. I thought of every time Mrs. Grimshaw had told me that I was nothing that I deserved, nothing that I should accept the crumbs I was given and be grateful. I found the section with respiratory medications, the ones I had read about in my stolen medical textbooks. Ephedrine tablets, eucalyptus oil, mentholated syrup for coughs. I slipped 2 bottles into my coat pocket, and then I walked out. I did not look back. I did not breathe until I was 3 blocks away, and then I sat down on the curb next to my unconscious sister and cried. Not from guilt, though I felt that too. From the sheer overwhelming weight of being 18 years old and entirely alone in the world with a dying sister and no one to help us. From the knowledge that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. From the understanding that I would cross 100 more lines if it meant keeping Opal alive. But the medicine worked. Within hours, Opal's fever began to break. Her breathing eased. Color crept back into her cheeks like dawn creeping over a gray horizon. By the time we crossed into Kentucky, she was awake again. Weak, but breathing easier, looking out the bus window at mountains she had never seen before. Where are we going? She asked, her voice hoarse from 3 days of coughing. Home, I said, and I meant it, even though I had never seen the place, even though it was nothing but a sealed cave and 15 acres of hollow land. For the first time in my life, I was going home. Mr. Aldous Pemberton was waiting for us at the bus station in Millbrook. He was a small man, thin and precise, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from kindness. Not the sharp, suspicious kindness of charity workers who wanted something in return. Something softer, something real. He held a sign with our names written in careful script. Whitmore sisters, Miss Thea, Miss Opal. Nobody had ever called me Miss before. He removed his hat as we approached the old-fashioned gesture of a gentleman greeting ladies. Like we were people worthy of respect. Like we mattered. "I'm Aldous Pemberton," he said. "I was your great-aunt Josephine's attorney, and if I may say so, her friend." He looked at us with eyes that glistened with something like grief. "You look like her," he said quietly. "Both of you, something about the eyes, Vaughn." He drove us 30 miles into the mountains in a truck that rattled and groaned on the winding roads. The land changed as we climbed. Forests so thick the sunlight came through and scattered coins of gold. Abandoned farmhouses with hollow-eyed windows. Barns collapsing slowly back into the earth. Ridges that rose and fell like the breathing of some ancient sleeping creature. "Your great-aunt was a remarkable woman," Mr. Pemberton said as he drove. His voice carried the weight of long acquaintance. "She lived alone in Shadow Creek Hollow for 45 years, studied plants, minerals, underground water systems, wrote letters to universities that mostly went unanswered." He paused, his hands tightening slightly on the steering wheel. "People in town thought she was strange. Some called her worse things." "Like what?" Opal asked from the back seat. She was wrapped in a blanket I had bought at a general store in Lexington, her color slowly returning, her breathing easier in the mountain air. Mr. Pemberton's jaw tightened. "They called her a witch, Miss Opal, because she knew things they couldn't explain, because she didn't need them, because she was a woman alone who answered to no one." His voice dropped, and that frightened people. The road turned to dirt, then to mud, then to something that barely qualified as a path, ruts deep enough to swallow a wheel, branches scraping the sides of the truck like fingers trying to hold us back. We climbed through a gap in the ridge where the trees pressed close on either side. And then we emerged into a valley that opened up like a secret someone had been keeping for 1,000 years. "Shadow Creek Hollow," Mr. Pemberton said. And there it was. A cabin stood at the base of a limestone cliff, its white paint peeling like sunburned skin. The roof sagged on one side, weighted down by decades of snow and rain and neglect. Several windows had been boarded up with weathered planks. A collapsed fence surrounded what had once been a garden, now overgrown with wild roses and weeds. It was a ruin. It was beautiful. But beyond the cabin, half hidden by rhododendron and wild grape, was something else. A wooden door set into the rock face, framed by hand-cut limestone blocks that had been placed with obvious care. The stones were covered with moss, but the craftsmanship was unmistakable. The cave. "Your great-aunt sealed the entrance after she finished her work inside," Mr. Pemberton said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a rusted key, heavy and old. "I don't know what you'll find. She left instructions that only family could open it." He placed the key in my hand. Then he reached behind his seat and pulled out something else. A leather-bound journal, thick as a Bible, held together with a worn leather strap. On the cover, in careful handwriting that reminded me of the script on old maps, it said, "Notes on the cultivation of life in darkness. Josephine Whitmore, 1893 to 1937. 44 years of work, 44 years of knowledge, 44 years of a woman's life bound in leather and placed in my hands. She also left this," Mr. Pemberton said. "She wanted you to have it. She was very specific about that." I held that journal like it was a living thing, like it had a heartbeat that matched my own. "One more thing." Mr. Pemberton's voice changed, became heavier. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a yellowed envelope, creased and worn from being handled many times. "This was with her papers. I wasn't sure whether to show you, but you deserve to know." I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dated 7 years ago, a letter written in the same careful hand as the journal, addressed to Mrs. Grimshaw at Thornwood Home for Unwanted Children. My eyes scanned the words, and the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. "I am writing to inquire about the possibility of taking guardianship of my great-niece and great-nephew Thea and Opal Whitmore. I understand they have been in your care for some years now. I am a woman of modest means, but I have land, fresh air, and more love than I know what to do with. I believe I could give them a good life here in Kentucky. I would be grateful for any information you could provide. Your servant, Josephine Whitmore. At the bottom of the page in different handwriting, Mrs. Grimshaw's sharp, angular script was stamped a single word in red ink. Denied. And beneath that in pencil, barely legible, unsuitable guardian. History of mental instability. Do not respond. I read the letter 3 times. Each time the words cut deeper. Each time the implications became clearer. Each time the rage built higher in my chest until I thought it might burn through my skin. 7 years. 7 years ago, someone had tried to save us. Someone had wanted us. Someone had looked at 2 orphaned children in a gray dormitory in Ohio and thought I could love them, I could give them a home. And Mrs. Grimshaw had stopped it. With a stamp. With a lie. With a penciled note that dismissed 45 years of a woman's life as mental instability. She tried to save us, I said quietly. My voice did not sound like my own. 7 years ago, she tried to save us, and they wouldn't let her. Opal was crying, silent tears streaming down her pale cheeks. She had been 6 years old when this letter was written. 6 years old and already coughing through every winter, already struggling to breathe, already fading. We could have been here for 7 years, in this hollow, in that cave, breathing clean air, eating food grown by someone who loved us, learning from a woman who shared our blood. Instead, he had cold oatmeal and cruelty and the constant grinding knowledge that we were unwanted. Mr. Pemberton looked away, his jaw tight. I'm sorry, he said. I thought you should know that you were wanted, that someone was trying to reach you, that you were never truly alone even when it felt like you were. He cleared his throat. Josephine waited for a response that never came. She wrote 3 more letters over the years. All of them were returned unopened. Eventually she stopped writing, but she never stopped hoping. He looked at the cabin at the cave entrance, at the hollow that had been Josephine's whole world for 45 years. She spent the last 7 years of her life preparing this place for you. Everything she did, every improvement she made, every note she wrote in that journal, it was all for you, for the family she never got to meet. If you are listening to this story, I want you to pause for a moment. I want you to think about your own life. Has anyone ever stood between you and someone who could have helped you? Has anyone ever made a decision about your future without your knowledge, without your consent? Has anyone ever taken something from you that you didn't even know you had? If so, I want you to know something important. It was not your fault. Whatever happened to you, whatever was taken from you, whatever choices were made without your permission, none of it was your fault. You were a child. You were powerless. You trusted the people who were supposed to protect you. And it is never too late to find the people who were meant to find you. Now let me tell you what happened when we opened that cave. The key fit the padlock, which was rusted but functional. Like someone had kept it oiled even after Josephine died. Like someone had been waiting for us. The wooden door swung inward with a groan that echoed into blackness. I lit the kerosene lantern Mr. Pemberton had given us. The flame caught and steadied, casting a warm golden glow into the darkness ahead. I stepped inside. What I saw made me drop to my knees. Josephine had built an underground garden. Not a garden in the way you might picture with rows of vegetables and cheerful sunlight and white picket fences. This was something stranger, something more beautiful, something that belonged in dreams or fairy tales, not in a limestone cave in the mountains of Kentucky. The cave's main chamber was roughly 60 feet wide and perhaps 15 feet high at its peak. The limestone walls curved overhead like the inside of a cathedral, pale gray, shot through with veins of darker stone. The natural floor had been leveled by hand, smoothed and divided into raised beds made of stacked stone that rose about 2 feet from the ground. Along the ceiling, Josephine had installed a series of angled mirrors. Actual glass mirrors, some cracked, some clouded with age, all mounted on wooden frames that she must have built herself. They were positioned at precise angles, catching the light from a narrow natural chimney near the entrance, a vertical shaft in the rock that opened to the sky somewhere above. During the hours when the sun hit that chimney at the right angle, the light would bounce from mirror to mirror to mirror, traveling deeper into the cave, multiplying and softening until it reached the farthest wall. Even now in the late afternoon, the cave glowed with a soft, diffused light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. But that was not all. Josephine had understood something about caves that most people never consider. The temperature underground stays nearly constant year-round. In that part of Kentucky, the cave held steady at around 55 degrees. Too cool for summer crops in the outside world, but warm enough that nothing ever froze. She had built a series of stone channels that directed the cave's natural water seepage, the slow weeping of moisture through limestone, into a collection pool near the back wall. From there, the water flowed through channels she had carved into the rock, passing through each raised bed before draining into a natural fissure in the floor. The limestone itself acted as a filter, slowly releasing calcium and other minerals into the water as it passed through, creating a natural fertilizer that enriched everything it touched. The beds were empty now. Whatever Josephine had last grown had died or been harvested years ago. But the infrastructure was all there. The mirrors, the water channels, the stone beds. The careful engineering of a woman who had spent 45 years turning a geological curiosity into a working farm. I sat on the cave floor and wept. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming recognition that someone like me, someone the world had called strange, someone who studied and questioned and refused to accept the way things were, had come before me, had lived in this very place, had built something extraordinary out of nothing but knowledge and stubbornness in time. Josephine had been alone her whole life, called a witch, called crazy, called unsuitable, and she had built a cathedral of food and light in the darkness of a mountain. She had proven them all wrong, and now she had given that proof to us. Opal's step had passed me into the cave. She walked slowly, carefully, her footsteps echoing on the smooth stone floor. She moved to the center of the main chamber, where the reflected light was strongest, where the air was coolest and cleanest and most perfectly still. And she stopped. She closed her eyes, and she breathed, deeply, fully, without wheezing, without coughing, without the terrible rattling sound that had accompanied every breath she had taken for the past 6 years. I watched her chest rise and fall, smooth and easy, natural, the way breathing was supposed to be. "Thea," she whispered. Her voice carried through the cave, soft and clear. I can breathe. I rose from the floor where I had fallen. I walked to her. I took her hands in mine and looked into her gray-green eyes, our mother's eyes, and I saw something there I had not seen in years. Life. Not the thin, desperate survival of the sanatorium bound, but real life, full and present and possible. "Then we're home," I said. And that was how I knew. The first week nearly killed us. I do not say that for dramatic effect. I mean it literally. We had arrived in late March, and the mountains of Kentucky do not care what the calendar says. Winter holds on with both hands up there. Spring is a promise, not a fact. The warm days we had felt on the bus gave way to bitter cold once we reached the hollow. The cabin Josephine had built beside the cave entrance was still standing, but barely. The roof leaked in 4 places, dripping water onto the floor whenever rain or melting snow accumulated above. The wood stove was cracked down the middle, a fissure that let heat escape and smoke enter. Mice had made nests in the mattress, leaving behind droppings and the smell of abandonment. The smell of mold hung heavy in every room. The smell of a place that had given up on being lived in. There was no food except some ancient jars of preserved beans in the root cellar. Half of them had gone bad, their lids swollen and hissing when I touched them. The others were questionable at best. I ate them anyway. I did not have a choice. On our second night it snowed. Not a gentle dusting, but a real mountain snow. Heavy and wet, the kind that bends trees and buries roads and cuts off hollows from the rest of the world. I woke at 3 o'clock in the morning to water dripping on my face through the roof and the wood stove dead because the firewood I had gathered was green and would not hold a flame. I lay there in the dark, shaking so hard my teeth ached, and I thought about going back. The thought came unbidden, unwanted, but undeniable. Mrs. Grimshaw's oatmeal, the dormitory's thin warmth, the certainty of a life I understood even if I hated it. Even the laughter of those 23 children seemed warm now compared to this cold. Even the threat of Waverly Hills seemed distant. We could go back. We could admit defeat. We could say we tried and failed, and please, please, just let us survive. But then I looked at Opal. She was sleeping, actually sleeping, not tossing with fever, not gasping for air, not fighting for every breath like a drowning person fights for the surface. Her breathing was deep and even. Her face was peaceful, even in the cold, even with the roof leaking and the fire dead. She was breathing better than she had in years. The cave was working. Even with everything falling apart around us, the cave was doing exactly what Josephine had designed it to do, providing clean temperature, stable air for lungs that could not tolerate the outside world. I could not take Opal back to Ohio. I would not. So instead, as the gray dawn crept into the cabin through the boarded windows, I dragged myself to the table and opened Josephine's journal by candlelight. I turned past the first page, the one I had already read on the drive up, and I found something I had not noticed before. A second entry written in smaller script, like a postscript, like a secret. If you are reading this, you are family. If you are family, then you are already stronger than you know. The first winter is the hardest, but the cave will keep its promises, and so will I. Everything I have learned is in these pages. Everything I could not give you in person, I have given you here. Trust the process. Trust yourself. And remember, you are never truly alone. Even when I am gone, my love remains. It is in every stone, every mirror, every drop of water. It is in the walls themselves. Find me there. I closed the journal and pressed it to my chest. And then I got to work. The morning after the snowstorm, something impossible happened. I opened the cabin door to find a bundle of dry firewood stacked neatly on the porch. Perfect firewood. Split clean, seasoned dry, ready to burn. The kind of firewood that would catch immediately and burn hot and hold a flame all night. But there were no footprints. The snow lay smooth and undisturbed from the porch to the tree line. No tracks, no trail, no evidence that anyone had approached the cabin at all. Just the wood, as if it had materialized from the air itself. "Thea," Opal called from inside. "What is it?" I did not answer. I was staring at the tree line, at the shadows between the bare branches, at the snow falling soft and quiet over everything. And then I saw him, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, perhaps 50 yards away. An old man, tall and straight, despite his years, with dark skin and a wool cap pulled low over his ears, a walking stick in his hand, a canvas bag over his shoulder. He was watching me. His eyes held no threat, no curiosity even, just assessment, evaluation, the careful study of someone deciding whether to trust. We looked at each other for a long moment. The snow fell between us. The wind stirred the branches. The world was silent except for the soft hiss of flakes landing on stone. And then he turned and walked back into the trees. No wave, no nod, no acknowledgement at all. Just that long look, and then he was gone, vanishing into the forest like he had never been there at all. I carried the wood inside and started the fire. By noon, the cabin was warm for the first time since we had arrived. And I knew with a certainty I could not explain that we were being watched over, that someone in these mountains knew we were here, that Josephine's promises extended beyond the grave. We were not alone. We had never been alone. 3 days later, he came back. This time I was waiting. I had been watching the tree line every morning, looking for that tall figure with the walking stick, looking for the person who had saved us from freezing in the night. He emerged from the trees at dawn carrying another bundle of wood and a sack of something heavy, moving slowly but steadily with the careful grace of someone who had spent decades learning how to walk through wild country. I met him at the edge of the clearing. "Thank you," I said, "for the firewood." He studied me for a long moment. Up close, I could see his age. He must have been 70, at least, maybe older. His face was weathered and lined like the bark of an old oak that had survived 100 storms. His hands were calloused and scarred. His eyes were deep brown, almost black, and they held a depth of understanding that made me feel seen in a way I had not felt since our mother died. "Josephine saved my life," he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel over wood, like something that had been used hard for many years and wore its use with pride. 20 years ago, I was working on the railroad when there was an accident. Track collapsed, crushed my leg. My people carried me to town to the doctor. He paused. The doctor wouldn't see me. I understood. I had read enough history to know what he meant. I had read about the world that existed before I was born, The world that still existed in many places. The world where the color of your skin determined whether you deserved to live or die. None of them would, he continued, said they didn't treat my kind. His voice was flat, matter of fact, the voice of someone stating something so obvious it hardly needed saying. Josephine found me on the road outside town, couldn't carry me, so she made a sled from branches and dragged me 3 miles up into this hollow. Splinted my leg, made medicines from plants in that cave. Kept me alive for 3 months while I healed. He shifted the bundle of wood in his arms. My name is Solomon Hayes. I was born enslaved in Georgia. I've been free for 60 years, but people still look at me like I'm less than human. His eyes met mine. Josephine never looked at me that way. Not once. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer. She told me once, in the darkness of the cave, no one can see the color of skin. They can only see the content of character. He held out the sack he had been carrying. Beans, dried corn, salt pork, enough to get you through till spring. I took the sack with hands that trembled, not from cold this time, from something else entirely. Why, I asked. Why are you helping us? Solomon's weathered face softened. The hard lines around his eyes eased just for a moment. Because Josephine asked me to. He looked toward the cabin, toward the cave entrance beyond. The last time I saw her before she died, she made me promise. She said someone would come. Someone young, someone running from something, someone who needed a home. He paused. She said, take care of them, Solomon. They're carrying the future even if they don't know it yet. He turned to go, but I caught his arm. Will you teach us, I asked, how to survive up here, how to make this place into what she imagined? Solomon looked at me for a long moment. His eyes searched my face looking for something. I did not know what. You're not afraid of an old black man living alone in the woods, he asked. I thought about Mrs. Grimshaw, about the doctor who would not treat him, about the world that had told both of us we were worthless. I'm not afraid of anyone who loved my aunt, I said. I'm not afraid of anyone Josephine trusted. Something shifted in his face, something that might have been approval. Then I'll teach you, he said, everything I know. He turned and walked back toward the trees, but at the edge of the clearing, he stopped. One more thing, he said. Man named Cornelius Blackwood, drives a black Ford, dresses like a city banker. If he comes around here asking questions, don't tell him nothing. Who is he? Solomon's face darkened. The man who wanted Josephine dead. The man who's been waiting 40 years for her to die so he could take this land. He looked back at me and his eyes were hard. He's going to come for you too. Soon as he hears you're here, and when he does, you need to be ready. Then he was gone, vanishing into the trees like smoke, leaving me standing in the clearing with a sack of food and a warning, in the growing certainty that our fight was only beginning. That night, I read Josephine's journal by firelight, page after page of careful observations, diagrams of the cave system, notes on which plants grew best in which conditions, calculations about light angles and water flow and soil composition. The accumulated wisdom of 45 years written down for someone she had never met. For us. Opal sat beside me wrapped in a blanket, her breathing easy and clear. She was reading the journal over my shoulder, asking questions I could not always answer. She was so alone, Opal said quietly. All those years, working by herself, writing to no one. She was waiting for us, I said. She was getting ready. But she never got to see us come. I closed the journal and put my arm around my sister. She sees us now, I said. I believe that, no. Outside, the wind howled through the hollow. The fire crackled in the stove. The cabin creaked and groaned like an old ship riding out a storm. But inside, we were warm. We were fed. We were together. And somewhere in that cave, I could feel Josephine's presence, not a ghost, not a memory, but a promise kept across the years. We would make this place bloom. We would prove them all wrong. We would carry the future just like she said. Tomorrow, I would start learning how. Over the next 3 months, Solomon Hayes became our lifeline. He came every day at dawn, sometimes with firewood, sometimes with food, sometimes with nothing but his presence and his knowledge. He taught us how to split wood efficiently, how to read the grain so the axe fell true. He taught us how to repair the cabin roof, replacing rotted boards with salvaged lumber from an abandoned barn 2 miles down the hollow. He taught us how to read weather in the clouds and the behavior of birds, how to know when a storm was coming by the way the leaves turned silver in the wind, how to find water when the creek ran dry following the paths deer had worn into the hillside. He brought us tools from his shed, a proper shovel with a hickory handle worn smooth by decades of use, a hand plow that looked ancient but still worked, a set of chisels for working limestone, the same chisels Josephine had used to carve the water channels in the cave. But Solomon understood something important. This was not his hollow, not his cave, not his dream to build. Every time he showed me something new, he would demonstrate once, explain twice, and then step back. Every time a decision needed to be made, he would offer his opinion if I asked, but he never insisted, never overruled, never made me feel like a child who needed to be managed. Your aunt trusted you to figure things out, he told me once early on. She left that journal for you, not for me. You're the one who needs to learn what it means. I appreciated that more than I could say. I had spent 18 years being told what to do by people who did not care about me. Mrs. Grimshaw and her rules, the state and its requirements, a world full of adults who saw children as problems to be managed rather than people to be respected. Solomon treated me like an equal, like someone whose decisions mattered, like someone who had earned the right to make her own choices, even if those choices were sometimes wrong. And so I made decisions. I decided to repair the mirror system first. Half the mirrors Josephine had installed were cracked or clouded beyond usefulness. But I had read in her journal about alternatives, about polished metal, about the reflective properties of certain surfaces. I found an automobile graveyard 20 miles down the mountain. An old man named Hendricks ran it, selling parts to anyone who could pay. I traded 3 jars of the preserved beans from Josephine's root cellar for 6 headlight reflectors, dented and scratched but still functional. Solomon helped me mount them in the cave, but I chose the angles. I calculated the positions based on Josephine's diagrams and my own observations of how the light moved through the natural chimney at different times of day. The new reflectors were not as elegant as the original mirrors, but they caught the light and bounced it deeper into the darkness, and that was what mattered. I decided which crops to plant first. Cold-tolerant vegetables that could handle the cave's constant temperature. Lettuce, spinach, kale, turnips, radishes, things that would grow fast and prove the system worked before we invested in anything more ambitious. I cleaned the water channels myself on my hands and knees in the darkness, scraping away years of mineral buildup and debris. The water began to flow again, slow and steady, weeping through the limestone and carrying nutrients to the raised beds. And Opal helped, not with the heavy work. Her lungs were better, but she was still fragile, still recovering from years of damage. But she had a gift I had not expected. She noticed things, small things, details that I missed because I was too focused on the big picture. She noticed that the back wall of the cave stayed warmer than the front, holding heat from the previous day's sunlight, like a battery storing charge. She noticed that certain sections of the water channels flowed faster than others, creating microclimates within the beds. She started keeping her own journal, recording temperatures at different times of day, mapping the variations in light and moisture, building on Josephine's work with observations of her own. The mushroom chamber is different, she told me one afternoon, her voice filled with quiet excitement. The humidity is higher there, and the temperature is more stable. I think that's why Josephine grew mushrooms in that section. She was right. I checked her observations against Josephine's notes and found confirmation. The cave's back chamber, cut off from the main entrance, maintained conditions perfect for fungal cultivation. Opal was only 13, but she was becoming a scientist, learning to see the world the way Josephine had seen it, the way I was trying to see it. 6 weeks after we arrived, I harvested my first lettuce. It was pale, a lighter green than sun-grown lettuce with leaves that were thinner and more delicate, but it was crisp and sweet and alive. Food I had grown with my own hands in a place where everyone said nothing could grow. I stood in that dim cave holding that head of lettuce, and something shifted inside me. Not hope this time. Something stronger. Something more permanent. Capability. I had made something. From nothing but knowledge and stubbornness and time, I had created food. I had proven that Josephine's system worked. I had proven that her 45 years of labor had not been wasted. I had proven that I was not nothing. That night, Solomon joined us for dinner on the cabin porch. We ate salad made from lettuce I had grown, beans from Josephine's root cellar, cornbread that Opal had learned to make from Solomon's patient instruction. Simple food, poor food by some standards, but it was ours. The sun set over the hollow painting, the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. The first fireflies of spring began to flicker in the meadow below. The air smelled like earth and green things and possibility. "We should name it," Opal said suddenly. I looked at her. "Name what?" "The cave." She smiled, and in that smile I saw the sister I remembered from before the asthma got bad. The bright, curious girl who used to chase butterflies and ask questions about everything. "We should give it a name." "What kind of name?" She thought about it for a moment. Her gray-green eyes reflected the fading light. "The Moonlight Garden," she said, "because the light inside is soft, like moonlight, not harsh like the sun, just gentle, constant, always there." I thought about it. The Moonlight Garden, a garden that grew in darkness, lit by reflected light, tended by two orphans who had escaped a world that wanted them to fail. "The Moonlight Garden," I said. "I like it." Solomon nodded slowly, his weathered face softening. "Josephine would have liked it too," he said. But our peace would not last long. The first challenge came from the town itself. I began selling vegetables at the Saturday market in Millbrook, setting up a small stand at the edge of town beside the bridge over Shadow Creek. I arranged everything in baskets lined with clean cloth, the way Josephine's journal had suggested. "Presentation matters," she had written. "People eat first with their eyes." At first, people were suspicious. Winter greens in early May seemed unnatural. Wrong, against the order of things. Mrs. Patterson at the general store told people I was practicing some kind of dark art growing things where no sun reached. "That girl's selling witch vegetables," I heard her whisper to another woman. "Same as her crazy aunt. Mark my words, eating that food will make you sick." Or worse. The preacher, Reverend Harkins, even warned his congregation about unnatural harvests, about the dangers of food that came from darkness rather than light, about young women who lived alone in the mountains and did not attend church on Sundays. But hunger is a more powerful preacher than any man in a pulpit. One by one, families tried our food. The Hendersons, whose children had not eaten fresh greens since October. The Morgans, whose grandmother was sick and craved something besides canned beans and salt pork. The Carters, who were too poor to be picky and too practical to believe in witchcraft. They tasted the lettuce and the spinach and the crisp little radishes that snapped between their teeth. And they came back for more. Children who had not eaten fresh vegetables in 6 months were eating salads in May. Their mothers looked at me differently after that. Not with suspicion, but with something closer to gratitude. Still the whispers continued, and I learned to ignore them. What I could not ignore was the black Ford that appeared in our hollow one morning in late summer. I was on the terraces above the cave, the hillside gardens we had built for summer crops that needed more light than the cave could provide. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, things that would supplement our underground harvest and prove that we could farm both worlds. The car rolled slowly up the muddy path, engine growling, chrome glinting in the morning sun. It was too clean for these mountains, too polished, like something that belonged in a city showroom rather than a backcountry hollow. It stopped in the clearing, and a man stepped out. He was about 50 years old, heavy-set but not soft, with the kind of bulk that came from good food and easy living rather than hard labor. Silver hair slicked back from a florid face. A suit that was too fine for these mountains. City clothes meant to impress. I climbed down from the terrace and approached. "Miss Whitmore," he called out before I reached him. His voice was smooth, practiced, the voice of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. "I'm Cornelius Blackwood. I own most of the land in this valley." He gestured at the hollow around us, at the mountains rising on every side, at everything I had started to think of as home. "I was a friend of your great aunt's," he said. I did not believe him. Something about the way he said friend made my skin crawl. The word came out wrong, like a note played off key, like a lie dressed up in Sunday clothes. "What do you want, Mr. Blackwood?" "Straight to business." He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "I like that. Let me be direct with you, Miss Whitmore. This land, this hollow, it's not suitable for a young woman and her sister. You need experience to make a farm work. You need capital. You need connections in town. You need a man's guidance. He said the last words with a particular emphasis, as if they should mean something to me, as if I should recognize my own helplessness and be grateful for his attention. We're doing fine, I said. For now, perhaps. But winter will come again. And then what? He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. White, clean, official looking. I'm prepared to offer you $200 for the land and the cave. That's a generous price, Miss Whitmore. More than fair for 15 acres of hollow land and a hole in a rock. $200. I thought about our $47, most of which was gone now. I thought about the seeds I had planted, the lettuce I had harvested, the way Opal could breathe down here. I thought about Josephine's journal and her 45 years of work. I thought about her promise that she would always be with us. No, I said. Blackwood's smile faltered, just for a moment, just enough for me to see the hardness underneath. I beg your pardon. I said no. The land isn't for sale. The cave isn't for sale. We're staying. His face changed. The mask of friendliness fell away, and underneath I saw something cold, something calculating, something that had been waiting a long time to get what it wanted. Miss Whitmore, I don't think you understand your situation. His voice dropped, becoming quieter, more dangerous. You're two orphans with no money and no experience. You have no family. No one to protect you. The people in town already think you're strange, living up here in the Witch's Hollow, playing in her cave. He took a step closer. Josephine wasn't a witch, I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. No, she was something worse. She was a woman who thought she was smarter than everyone else. A woman who refused to listen to reason. A woman who made enemies of people who tried to help her. He leaned closer and I could smell his cologne. Something expensive. Something that did not belong in these mountains. And you know what happened to her? She died alone. Forgotten. Nobody came to her funeral except a lawyer and an old colored man. I held his gaze without flinching. Get off my land, Mr. Blackwood. He stared at me for a long moment. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. Then he laughed. It was a cold sound, unpleasant. The laugh of a man who had heard a joke that only he understood. You'll regret this, he said. I've been waiting 40 years for this land. I can wait a few more months. He walked back to his car. His shoes left prints in the mud that looked like wounds in the earth. Just before he climbed in, he turned. Ask your friend Solomon about me sometime, he said. Ask him why I've been waiting 40 years. Ask him what your precious aunt really did. And then he was gone. The black Ford disappeared down the hollow road, and I stood there with my heart pounding and my hands clenched and a cold certainty settling into my bones. This was not over. This was only beginning. That evening I told Solomon about Blackwood's visit. We were sitting on the cabin porch watching the last light fade from the sky. Opal was inside recording the day's observations in her journal. The fire crackled softly in the stove, sending occasional sparks up through the repaired chimney. Solomon's face went very still when I mentioned the name. I should have warned you, he said quietly. I thought he might wait longer, let you settle in before he made his move. What does he want? Just the land. Solomon shook his head slowly. His eyes were distant, looking at something I could not see, something from long ago. He doesn't want the land, Solomon said. Not really. He wants the cave, and he wants to destroy everything Josephine built. He paused. 40 years ago, Cornelius Blackwood asked Josephine to marry him. I stared at him. The words did not make sense. The cold, calculating man in the expensive suit and the woman who had built a cathedral underground, who had spent her life alone studying plants and minerals and the patterns of light. She was beautiful back then, Solomon continued. Smart, independent, everything he thought he wanted in a wife. She would have been a prize for him, something to show off, a pretty brilliant woman on his arm. His voice grew darker. But Josephine discovered something about him, something he had hidden from everyone in the valley. What? He already had a wife. The words fell like stones into still water. A woman in Louisville, a woman he had married young before he came to Kentucky, a woman he had abandoned when she got sick, when she stopped being useful to him. He left her with 2 children and no money and never looked back. Solomon's hands tightened on his walking stick. He came to these mountains to start over. built a new identity, told everyone he was a bachelor, a self-made man looking for a good woman to build a life with. And Josephine found out. She found out. Don't know how. She never told me, but she found proof, letters, documents, something solid enough that he couldn't deny it. Solomon looked at me and his eyes were hard. She could have kept quiet, could have married him anyway, could have had money and security and everything that goes with being a rich man's wife. But she didn't. No, she told everyone, stood up in the middle of the town square on a Saturday morning and read his letters aloud, told the whole valley who he really was, what he had really done. Solomon's voice dropped. She destroyed him, his reputation, his standing in the community, his plans for the future. Everything he had built in 15 years, she burned to the ground in 15 minutes. I thought about Blackwood's cold eyes, his careful smile, the way he had said the word friend like it tasted of poison. And he's been waiting ever since, I said. 40 years. Solomon nodded, waiting for her to die, waiting to take everything she built, waiting to prove that he won in the end. He looked toward the cave entrance, toward the darkness beyond. He tried other ways, tried to buy her out, tried to scare her off, tried to turn the town against her. But Josephine was stubborn, more stubborn than anyone I've ever known. A faint smile crossed his weathered face. She used to say the best revenge is a life well lived. So she lived, built her garden, wrote her journals, waited for the family she hoped would come. And now we're here. Now you're here. Solomon's eyes met mine, and Blackwood sees his chance. Two young girls, no family, no protection, no one to fight for you. His jaw tightened. He's wrong about that, but he doesn't know it yet. The months that followed Blackwood's visit were not easy. He began a quiet campaign against us. The kind of campaign that is hard to fight because it happens in whispers and shadows and glances, and silences and doors that close and invitations that never come. First, he convinced several merchants in town not to buy our vegetables. The feed store owner, Mr. Garrett, who had been friendly, suddenly would not meet my eyes when I approached his counter. The woman who ran the diner, Mrs. Olson, stopped placing orders, even though her customers had loved our greens. "I'm sorry," she said when I asked. Her voice was small, ashamed. "I just can't afford to make enemies right now. You understand?" I understood. Blackwood owned the building her diner was in. He could raise her rent. He could find reasons to make her life difficult. He had been making people's lives difficult in this valley for 40 years. Then came the rumors. Whispers that we were practicing dark magic in the cave, that our vegetables were cursed, that eating them would make you sick or barren or drive you mad. I heard children chanting rhymes about the witch girls in the hollow. I saw women cross the street to avoid me when I walked through town. I felt eyes following me everywhere. Suspicious eyes, frightened eyes, eyes that saw what Blackwood wanted them to see. One night, someone threw rocks through our cabin windows. 3 panes of glass shattered in the darkness. Opal woke screaming, convinced the roof was falling in. I held her while she cried, while her breath came in frightened gasps that threatened to become something worse. Another night, I found a dead crow nailed to our door, its black wings spread wide, its eyes empty, a warning that needed no words. Opal tried to stay strong. She kept recording her observations, kept helping with the garden, kept breathing the clean cave air that was slowly healing her lungs. But the stress was affecting her. Her cough returned. Not as bad as before, but enough to worry me. Enough to remind me how fragile she still was, how much she depended on this place to stay alive. "They hate us," she said one evening. Her voice was small, tired, the voice of a child who had already seen too much of the world's cruelty. "No," I said, "one man hates us. The rest are just afraid." "What's the difference?" I thought about Mrs. Patterson with her whispers, about Mrs. Olson with her apologies, about the children with their rhymes and the women who crossed the street. "Afraid people do stupid things," I said, "but they can learn to be brave. Hatred is harder to change." "What do we do?" I looked at my sister, at her pale face and dark circled eyes, at the fear she was trying so hard to hide. "We keep growing," I said. "We keep selling to the people who will buy. We outlast him." But I was not sure we could. I was not sure at all. It was late October, 7 months after we had arrived in Shadow Creek Hollow. The Moonlight Garden was thriving despite everything. We had expanded to all 6 raised beds. We were growing lettuce, spinach, kale chard, turnips, radishes, and herbs. Basil, thyme, oregano that filled the cave with a scent so beautiful it made me forget I was underground. Opal had become my true partner. She tracked the light patterns throughout the day, noting how the reflectors needed to be adjusted as the sun's angle changed with the seasons. She monitored water flow, measuring the mineral content with simple tests she had designed herself. She noticed a fungal infection in the basil before I did, spotting the tiny white spots on the underside of leaves that would have spread to the whole bed if we had not caught them in time. We isolated the infected plants and treated the rest with a copper solution Josephine had described in her journal. Her lungs grew stronger every week. There was color in her cheeks that I had not seen since she was a small child. She was gaining weight. She laughed more than I had ever heard her laugh. For the first time in our lives, we were something close to happy. And then someone broke into the cave. I woke to the sound of breaking glass, not the sharp crack of a thrown rock this time. Something bigger, something sustained, the sound of destruction that was deliberate and thorough and meant to hurt. By the time I reached the cave entrance, the damage was done. Half of the mirrors were shattered. The carefully arranged frames lay in pieces on the cave floor glass, mixed with bent metal and broken wood. 7 months of work destroyed in a single night. The water channels had been diverted. Someone had stuffed rocks and debris into the carved limestone, blocking the flow, flooding some beds while leaving others dry. Plants had been ripped from the soil and scattered. Lettuce heads crushed underfoot. Spinach torn and trampled. Herbs uprooted and thrown against the walls. Everything. Everything we had built. Everything Josephine had spent 45 years creating. Destroyed. I stood in the darkness because without the mirrors there was no light to see by. My lantern cast a small circle of gold around my feet and illuminating the ruins of our life. And I felt something shatter inside me that had nothing to do with glass. Behind me, Opal started to cough. Not a small cough. Not the manageable wheeze she had developed over the past few months as the stress took its toll. This was different. This was violent. This was the cough that had terrified me in Thornwood. The cough that had kept me awake at night listening to her breathe. The cough that meant her lungs were failing. The cough that meant she was dying. "Thea," she gasped. I turned. She was standing in the cave entrance, silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. Her hand was pressed to her chest. Her body was bent over. Her breath was coming in short, desperate gasps that sounded like drowning. I caught her as her knees buckled. Her face was pale, her lips were blue. Her chest was heaving with the effort to breathe. "Can't," she whispered. "Can't breathe." I carried her back to the cabin. I built up the fire. I wrapped her in blankets. I gave her every medicine we had, every remedy from Josephine's journal, every trick I had learned in 7 months of keeping her alive. Nothing worked. By dawn, she was barely conscious. Her fever was climbing. Her breath came in shallow, rattling gasps that sounded like death approaching. I knelt beside her bed, holding her hand, and I prayed. For the first time since our mother died, I prayed. I do not know who I prayed to. Maybe Josephine. Maybe our mother. Maybe some force in the universe that had not entirely forgotten about 2 orphans in a hollow in Kentucky. "Please," I whispered. "Please don't take her from me. She's all I have. She's everything." The door opened. I looked up, expecting Solomon. But it was not Solomon. A woman stood in the doorway, tall and angular, maybe 35, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. She carried a medical bag, black leather, worn soft with use. Her face was sharp but not unkind, and her eyes were the kind of eyes that had seen suffering and chosen to fight it anyway. "I'm Dr. Lenora Marsh," she said. "Solomon sent for me." She crossed to Opal's bedside in 3 quick strides. Her movements were efficient, professional, the movements of someone who had done this many times before. "How long has she been like this?" "Since last night." My voice cracked. "Her asthma. The cave helps, but someone destroyed it. And she couldn't. I need you to stop talking and let me work." I stopped talking. Dr. Marsh opened her bag and began examining Opal with quick, competent hands. She listened to her chest with a stethoscope. She checked her pulse. She looked into her eyes. Acute bronchospasm, she said, triggered by stress and cold exposure. I can help, but we need to work quickly. She pulled out a glass syringe and a small vial. I recognized it from my reading. Epinephrine. Hold her arm steady. I held Opal's arm while Dr. Marsh administered the injection. The needle slid in. The medicine disappeared into her blood. For a long moment, nothing happened. Opal lay still. Her breath continued its terrible rattling. Her lips stayed blue. I held her hand and waited and prayed and promised God that I would do anything, anything, if he would just let her live. And then slowly something changed. Her breathing began to ease. The rattling faded. The awful blue color crept back from her lips, replaced by something closer to normal. Her chest rose and fell with less effort, each breath coming a little easier than the one before. She'll be all right, Dr. Marsh said, but she needs rest, and she needs that cave. I started to cry. The tears came without warning, without permission, pouring down my cheeks in a flood I could not stop. 7 months of fear and exhaustion and determination, all of it released in a single moment. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you. Dr. Marsh sat back and looked at me. Her sharp face softened slightly. Solomon told me about you, she said. He told me what you've been building up here, what your aunt built before you. She paused. I knew your Aunt Miss Whitmore, not well. I only moved to this valley 5 years ago, but I visited the cave once when Josephine was still alive. Her eyes grew distant, remembering. What she built there, I've never seen anything like it. A complete underground agricultural system, designed and implemented by a woman working alone for decades. It should be studied. It should be celebrated. Instead, it's been destroyed by people who didn't understand it. Can it be rebuilt? The infrastructure is still there. The stone beds, the water channels, the natural chimney, the limestone walls. Dr. Marsh met my eyes. The mirrors can be replaced. The knowledge in that journal can't. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder stuffed with papers and documents that looked old and official. I've been looking through your aunt's papers, she said. The ones Mr. Pemberton gave me when I agreed to serve as your physician. She opened the folder. Did you know she applied for a patent in 1920? A patent for what she called underground agricultural systems? I shook my head. It was granted. Dr. Marsh smiled slightly. United States Patent Number 1847239, filed by Josephine Whitmore of Shadow Creek Hollow, Kentucky. Granted November 1920 for a novel system of underground cultivation using reflected light and natural water filtration. She held out a copy of the patent document. Official, real, undeniable. She held the patent until her death, which means the system in that cave isn't just a curiosity, Miss Whitmore. It's a legally protected invention, and Blackwood can't claim otherwise. But that was not all. There was something else, Dr. Marsh said. Her voice grew quieter, more serious. Something I think you need to see. She pulled out another document, a single sheet of yellowed paper fragile with age. I found this in the patent file. It's a letter your aunt wrote to the Department of Agriculture in 1915. She was trying to share her research, trying to get recognition for her work. I took the letter. My eyes scanned the careful handwriting so familiar now. The same elegant script that filled the journal. The same precise observations. The same hope that someone somewhere would understand what she had accomplished. And then I saw the notation at the bottom, a stamp from the Department of Agriculture, dated 1915. Beneath it, a handwritten note. Research received, promising results. Will recommend for publication under department supervision. But nothing was ever published, Dr. Marsh said, at least not under Josephine's name. I looked up at her. I did some research, she continued. In 1916, a Department of Agriculture official named Harold Morrison published a paper on novel techniques in underground cultivation. He received an award for it. He was promoted twice. He became head of the Agricultural Extension Service. She paused. The techniques he described were identical to the ones in your aunt's letter, word for word in some places. The truth hit me like a physical blow. He stole her work. Yes. Dr. Marsh's voice was flat, certain. And when Josephine complained, when she wrote letters demanding credit, they called her unstable. They said she was making up stories. They said she was a woman alone in the mountains with delusions of scientific achievement. Her jaw tightened. They destroyed her reputation so thoroughly that no one would ever believe her again. The same woman who built that cave, who developed techniques that are decades ahead of their time, was dismissed as a crazy mountain witch because she had the audacity to demand credit for her own work. I sat with that knowledge for a long time. My great-aunt had not just been eccentric. She had not just been strange. She had been brilliant. And powerful men had stolen her brilliance and then silenced her when she tried to speak. No wonder she had retreated to this hollow. No wonder she had spent 45 years alone tending her underground garden, writing her journal, waiting for someone who would understand. Waiting for me. "We're going to rebuild," I said. My voice was stronger than I expected. "And we're going to finish what she started." Dr. Marsh smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The rebuilding took 3 weeks. Solomon came every day as he always had, but he was not alone anymore. Dr. Marsh came whenever she could spare time from her practice. She had a scientific mind that matched Josephine's, and she understood the cave system in ways that helped me see it more clearly. She suggested improvements. She asked questions that led to better solutions. She treated me like a colleague, not a child. And then gradually others began to appear, 5 women from town. Women Josephine had helped over the years, secretly, without asking for anything in return. The first was Mrs. Henderson, whose son had nearly died of fever 10 years ago. Josephine had given her herbs when the doctor refused to come. The boy had lived. He was 15 now, tall and strong, and he came with his mother to help clear debris from the cave. The second was Mrs. Morgan, whose grandmother had been too poor to buy medicine during the hard winter of 1934. Josephine had brought food, preserved vegetables, things that kept an old woman alive when she should have died. The third was a woman named Sarah, who would not give her last name. She had a scar on her face and haunted eyes, and she flinched whenever anyone moved too quickly near her. She said only that Josephine had given her a place to stay when she had nowhere else to go. A few months of safety, of healing, of learning to feel human again. The fourth and fifth were sisters Ellen and Martha, who had lost their farm to drought and their husbands to the influenza. Josephine had helped them find work, had connected them with people who could use their skills, had treated them like people when the world treated them like burdens. They came with tools. They came with supplies. They came with strong hands and willing hearts. "Josephine never forgot us," Ellen said as she helped me repair a water channel. "We won't forget her." Together we rebuilt. We replaced the broken mirrors with new ones that Solomon found at an estate sale 3 counties over. We cleared the blocked channels. We replanted the beds that could be saved and started fresh with the ones that could not. The women taught me things that were not in Josephine's journal: how to stretch a dollar, how to preserve food through the winter, how to find allies in a community that seemed determined to reject you. And they taught me something else, something more important. I was not alone. I'd never been alone. Josephine had spent 45 years building connections I did not know about, planting seeds of kindness that were only now beginning to grow, creating a network of women who owed her debts they had been waiting decades to repay. Blackwood thought I was vulnerable. He thought I was isolated. He was wrong. By December, the Moonlight Garden was producing again, and this time we were not alone. The first winter in the restored cave was a triumph. While every other farm in the valley lay dormant under snow, our underground garden kept producing. Lettuce, kale, spinach, chard, turnips, radishes, mushrooms from the back chamber, herbs that filled the cave with fragrance. The variety was staggering for a mountain community that survived winter on canned goods and salt pork. I continued selling at the Saturday market in Millbrook, but I also started something new: house calls. Deliveries to families who could not make it to town. Fresh vegetables carried through the snow to doorsteps where children waited with eager eyes. The suspicion had faded. People had seen the women who helped us rebuild. They had heard the stories about what Josephine had done for their neighbors. They had tasted our food and found it good. Children who had not eaten fresh greens since October were eating salads in January. Their mothers came to the market now with smiles instead of whispers. Their fathers nodded to me on the street instead of looking away. But Blackwood had not given up. He made his final move in the spring of 1940. He came with a lawyer this time, a thin, nervous man from Louisville who kept pushing his spectacles up his nose and would not meet my eyes. They arrived in the same black Ford, but now there was a second car behind them carrying papers and documents and the weapons of legal warfare. "Miss Whitmore," Blackwood said. His voice was different now, harder, more certain. "I've been patient, more than patient, but my patience has limits." He handed me a sheaf of papers. "I'm petitioning the county court to invalidate your claim to this land. You and your sister are both under 21. You have no legal guardian. Under Kentucky law, minors cannot own property independently." I read the papers. My hands were steady. "I'm 20 now," I said. "I reached majority last year." "But you were 18 when you took possession." Blackwood's smile was cold. "And your sister is only 15. The original claim was invalid from the start. Everything you've done since then has been trespassing on state property." The lawyer cleared his throat. "We've already filed the petition with the county court. The hearing is scheduled for June. If you cannot produce evidence of legal guardianship or reach a settlement, before then the court will rule in favor of reversion to the state." "And you have already arranged to purchase the land at auction," I said. Blackwood's smile widened. "I have friends in county government. I've waited 40 years for this land, Miss Whitmore. I can wait 2 more months." He leaned closer. "But you don't have to lose everything. I'm prepared to make you a final offer. $300 and you walk away. You and your sister can start over somewhere else. Somewhere warmer. Somewhere her lungs won't trouble her." I looked at him, at his cold eyes, his confident smile, his certainty that he had already won. "Go to hell, Mr. Blackwood." His face went red, then white, then a kind of purple I had never seen on a human being before. "You'll regret this," he said. His voice was barely controlled. "I've destroyed better people than you. I've destroyed your aunt. I'll destroy you too." "My aunt built something that will outlast both of us," I said. "And so will I." He turned and stalked back to his car. The lawyer followed, clutching his papers, still not meeting my eyes. But before the lawyer climbed in, he paused. "Miss Whitmore," he said quietly, "for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I don't like this any more than you do." "Then why are you doing it?" He looked at Blackwood, who was already in the car, who was not listening. "Because I have a family," he said, "and he owns the bank that holds my mortgage." Then he was gone too. That evening, Mr. Pemberton came to the Hollow. He brought news that changed everything. "I've been doing some research," he said. We were sitting at the table in the cabin, the same table where I had first read Josephine's journal, looking into the legal situation, looking for anything that might help. And the petition Blackwood filed is technically valid. Kentucky law is clear about minors and property ownership. But there are exceptions. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. If the property is being used for agricultural purposes, and if the minor can demonstrate continuous improvement and productive use, the court can appoint a guardian ad litem to oversee the property until the minor reaches majority. Who would the guardian be? In most cases, a family member. Pemberton paused. But in cases where no family member is available, the court can appoint a responsible adult from the community. He looked at me. "Dr. Marsh has agreed to serve as your guardian for legal purposes. She's already filed the paperwork." I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been tight for so long I had forgotten it was there. "There's more," Pemberton said. "The patent, Josephine's patent from 1920. It's still valid, and it's still in her name." "What does that mean?" "It means the system in that cave is legally protected intellectual property. It means you're not just farming land, you're operating a patented invention. It means Blackwood can't claim the property as worthless hollow land when it contains a functioning federally recognized agricultural innovation." He smiled slightly. "I've been practicing law for 40 years. I've never seen a case quite like this, but I think we can win." "The hearing is in June," I said. "That's 2 months away." "Then we have 2 months to prepare." He stood to go, but at the door he paused. "One more thing, I found out who the judge will be for the hearing." "Who?" "His name is William Morrison." The blood drained from my face. "Morrison," I repeated, "the same name as Harold Morrison's son." Pemberton's face was grave. "The son of the man who stole Josephine's research." I sat down heavily. Of course. Of course it would be him. 40 years of injustice, and now the son of the thief would sit in judgment over the stolen woman's heirs. The scales were weighted from the start. The game was rigged before we even began. "What do we do?" I asked. Pemberton looked at me for a long moment. "We tell the truth," he said, "and we hope that the son is not the same as the father." The morning of the hearing dawned gray and heavy. June in Kentucky can be beautiful: soft green hills, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, air sweet with honeysuckle and promise. But that morning clouds hung low over the mountains like a judgment waiting to be delivered. The air was thick and still, the kind of stillness that comes before storms. I dressed in my best clothes, a simple blue dress that Dr. Marsh had helped me find in a secondhand shop in Lexington, clean white gloves that had belonged to Josephine, found in a drawer in the cabin, shoes that I had polished until they shone. I looked at myself in the small mirror that hung beside the cabin door. I looked older than 19. I looked like someone who had been fighting for a long time. I looked like Josephine. Opal came to stand beside me. She was dressed in a pale green dress that matched her eyes, her dark hair brushed until it gleamed. She was 15 now, taller than she had been when we arrived, stronger than anyone had expected her to become. She took my hand. "We're going to win," she said. "How do you know?" "Because Josephine is with us." She smiled that bright smile that I had thought was lost forever during the dark years at Thornwood. "I can feel her, can't you?" I could. In the weight of the journal in my bag, in the patent documents that Pemberton had gathered, in the letters and records, in evidence of 45 years of work that could not be erased by one man's hatred. "Yes," I said, "I can feel her." We walked out into the gray morning. Solomon was waiting with his truck, the same truck that had carried us so many miles over the past 2 years. Dr. Marsh was in the passenger seat, her medical bag beside her in case Opal needed help. But Opal did not need help today. Her breathing was strong. Her color was good. The cave had done its work, and she was proof that Josephine's dream was real. The drive to the county courthouse took an hour. The building sat in the center of Millbrook, a red brick structure with white columns that was meant to look impressive, but mostly looked tired. It had been built in the years after the Civil War, when this part of Kentucky was trying to pretend that progress was possible, that justice was more than a word. I wondered what justice would mean today. When we arrived, I expected the courthouse to be empty. A minor property dispute in a rural county, a case about orphans in a cave. Nothing that would draw a crowd. I was wrong. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled. People stood along the walls. More people crowded in the hallway outside, trying to hear through the open doors. I saw faces I recognized. Mrs. Henderson with her son, the boy Josephine had saved from fever. Mrs. Morgan with her grandmother's rosary in her hands. Sarah, the woman with the scar, standing in the back with her arms crossed and her eyes fierce. Ellen and Martha, the sisters who had lost everything and rebuilt themselves with Josephine's help. The families who had bought our vegetables through the winter. The children who had eaten fresh greens in January. And others. People I did not know. People who had heard stories. People who had come to see what would happen when one man's 40-year vendetta finally met its end. Solomon walked behind me, his walking stick tapping softly on the wooden floor. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence said everything. "I am here. You are not alone. We stand together." Cornelius Blackwood was already seated at the plaintiff's table. His lawyer beside him, still nervous, still unable to meet my eyes. Blackwood himself looked confident, triumphant, like a man who had already won and was simply waiting for the formalities to conclude. He did not look at the crowd. He did not see what I saw. The judge's chamber door opened and a bailiff stepped out. "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Morrison." The courtroom rose as one, and Judge Morrison entered. He was younger than I expected, maybe 50, tall and thin with gray hair at the temples and eyes that looked tired, tired in a way that suggested he had seen too much of the world's cruelty and was no longer sure what to do about it. He took his seat behind the bench. His eyes swept the courtroom, taking in the crowd, the standing room, only the faces that watched him with hope and fear and anticipation. His gaze lingered on me for a moment. I wondered what he saw. A young woman in a second-hand dress, an orphan with no family, a trespasser on state property, or something else. "Be seated," he said. We sat. This hearing is convened to consider the petition filed by Cornelius Blackwood regarding the property known as Shadow Creek Hollow, currently occupied by Thea Whitmore and her sister Opal Whitmore. He looked at Blackwood's lawyer. "Counsel, you may present your case." The lawyer stood. He was sweating even though the courtroom was cool. He shuffled his papers and cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the facts of this case are simple. On March 14, 1938, Thea Whitmore, then a minor of 18 years, took possession of property left to her by the deceased Josephine Whitmore. Under Kentucky Revised Statute 413.020, a minor cannot independently own or manage real property without the supervision of a legal guardian." He held up a document. "No guardian was appointed at the time of possession. No guardian exists now. The original claim was therefore invalid, and all subsequent use of the property constitutes trespassing on land that should have reverted to the state." He glanced at Blackwood, who nodded approvingly. "Mr. Blackwood has generously offered to purchase the property at fair market value, relieving the state of the burden of managing it and providing the Whitmore sisters with resources to establish themselves elsewhere." He sat down. Judge Morrison looked at me. "Miss Whitmore, you are representing yourself in this matter." I stood. "I am, Your Honor." "You understand that you have the right to an attorney." "I do, but this is my story. I would like to tell it myself." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Morrison's expression did not change. "Very well. You may present your response." I walked to the center of the courtroom. I had rehearsed this 100 times. In the cabin, in the guam, in my dreams. But now, standing before the judge and the crowd and the man who wanted to destroy everything I had built, the rehearsed words fell away. What remained was the truth. "Your Honor, I came to Shadow Creek Hollow 2 years ago with my sister. She was dying. The doctor said she would not survive another winter. The orphanage where we lived was preparing to send her to an institution where she would die alone, surrounded by strangers." I paused. "We ran. We had nowhere else to go. And then we received a letter telling us that our great-aunt had left us a piece of land in a cave." I reached into my bag and pulled out the journal. This is Josephine Whitmore's journal. 44 years of work. 44 years of scientific observation and agricultural innovation. She built an underground garden in that cave. A system of mirrors and water channels that allows crops to grow year-round without sunlight. I held up the patent document. In 1920, she received a United States patent for this system. Patent number 1847239. She was not a crazy woman living alone in the mountains. She was a scientist, an inventor, a pioneer in agricultural technology. I looked at the crowd. The people in this courtroom know what she built. They have eaten food grown in her cave. Their children have eaten fresh vegetables in the middle of winter because of her work. I turned back to the judge. "Mr. Blackwood's petition claims that I took possession of the property illegally because I was a minor. But I did not come to Shadow Creek Hollow to claim property. I came to save my sister's life. And I succeeded." I gestured to Opal sitting in the front row. 2 years ago, my sister could barely breathe. She coughed blood. She turned blue in her sleep. Every doctor we saw said she would not survive. Opal stood. "Look at her now." Opal's face was pink with health. Her breathing was easy and clear. She stood straight and tall and living proof that Josephine's cave was more than a hole in the ground. "The cave saved her life," I continued, "and I have spent the last 2 years maintaining and improving the system that made that possible. I have paid taxes on the property. I have sold produce at the Millbrook Market. I have fed families who had no other source of fresh food in winter." I held up a stack of papers. "These are records of every improvement I have made, every harvest, every sale, every tax payment. I have treated this land not as a temporary shelter, but as a home, as a farm, and as the legacy my aunt intended me to continue." I looked at Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood claims he wants to purchase the property at fair market value, but he has never offered fair market value. He offered $200 for 15 acres of land, a functioning agricultural system, and a federally patented invention. That is not a fair offer. That is theft." Blackwood's face reddened, and he has tried other methods to force me out. Rumors spread through town, businesses pressured not to buy from me, rocks thrown through my windows, a dead crow nailed to my door. I paused. And 2 months ago, someone broke into the cave and destroyed 7 months of work. They smashed the mirrors. They blocked the water channels. They tore plants from the soil and scattered them on the ground. The courtroom was silent. I cannot prove who did these things, but I can tell you who has spent 40 years trying to destroy Josephine Whitmore and everything she built. I can tell you who has hated her since she refused to marry him and exposed his lies to the world. I pointed at Blackwood. That man. Blackwood shot to his feet. This is slander I demand. Sit down, Mr. Blackwood. Judge Morrison's voice was sharp. You will have an opportunity to respond. Right now, Miss Whitmore has the floor. Blackwood sat. His face was a mask of barely controlled fury. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for justice. I am asking you to recognize that Josephine Whitmore's work was real and valuable. That her legacy deserves to continue. That her great nieces, who she tried to save 7 years before she died, deserve a chance to build the life she wanted for us. I held up the final document, the letter Mrs. Grimshaw had stamped with the word denied. 7 years ago, Josephine Whitmore wrote to the orphanage where we lived. She asked to take custody of us. She offered us a home, fresh air, love. My voice cracked. The orphanage refused. They called her unsuitable. They said she had a history of mental instability. They threw her letter away and never told us it existed. I looked at the judge. We could have been here for 7 years. We could have known her. We could have learned from her. We could have had a family. Tears were running down my face now. I did not try to stop them. Instead, we had 11 years of cold oatmeal and cruelty. 11 years of being told we were nothing. 11 years of watching my sister slowly die while people who were supposed to protect us did nothing. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. I am not going to let that happen again. I am not going to let another person who claims to know what is best for us take away the one thing that has ever been truly ours. I looked at the crowd, at the faces watching me, at the people who had come to see what would happen. This land is our home. This cave is our future, and no one is going to take it from us. I sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Morrison stared at me for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. His eyes were distant, looking at something that was not in this room. Mr. Blackwood, he said finally, do you wish to respond? Blackwood stood. His composure had returned, though his face was still flushed. Your Honor, this is a simple property dispute. Miss Whitmore's emotional appeal while moving does not change the facts of the law. She was a minor when she took possession. No legal guardian was appointed. The claim is invalid. He smiled. As for her accusations against me, they are baseless slander from a desperate young woman trying to hold on to property she has no legal right to occupy. He sat down. Judge Morrison was silent. The courtroom waited, and then the judge did something no one expected. He stood up. Before I make my ruling, he said, I have something to say. The courtroom stirred. This was unusual. Judges did not make speeches before rulings. They read their decisions and moved on. But Judge Morrison was not moving on. I became a judge because I believed in justice, he said. I believed that the law was meant to protect people, to ensure that the powerful could not simply take what they wanted from the weak. He paused. But I have learned over the years that the law is not always just, that powerful men can use it as a weapon, that the truth can be buried under procedure and precedent and the weight of money. He looked at me. Miss Whitmore, you said that Josephine Whitmore received a patent for her agricultural system in 1920. You are correct. But what you may not know is that her work was recognized even earlier. He reached into his robes and pulled out a yellow document. In 1915, Josephine Whitmore sent a detailed description of her underground cultivation techniques to the Department of Agriculture. She hoped they would publish her research. She hoped she would receive recognition for her work. His voice hardened. Instead, a Department of Agriculture official named Harold Morrison took her research and published it under his own name. He received awards. He was promoted. He built his career on her stolen work. The courtroom was absolutely silent. When Josephine complained when she wrote letters demanding credit, they called her unstable. They said she was making false accusations. They destroyed her reputation so thoroughly that no one would ever believe her again. Judge Morrison's jaw tightened. Harold Morrison was my father. The words fell like stones into still water. I found his private papers after he died. Letters from Josephine, her original research, the evidence of what he had done. He looked at me and his eyes were filled with something that might have been shame. I became a judge because I wanted to make things right, because I believed that justice even delayed was better than no justice at all. He held up the yellow document. This is Josephine Whitmore's original research submission, dated 1915, signed by her own hand, proving beyond any doubt that the techniques my father claimed as his own were stolen from a woman who spent her life being called crazy and unstable. He set the document on the bench. I requested this case specifically because I recognized the name Whitmore, because I knew that if anyone connected to Josephine ever came before this court, I would have an opportunity to do what should have been done 40 years ago. He looked at Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood, your petition is denied. Blackwood shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is improper. You have a conflict of interest. I demand a recusal. Sit down, Mr. Blackwood. The judge's voice was cold. I am not recusing myself. I am ruling on the facts of this case. The facts are simple. Thea Whitmore has demonstrated continuous occupation and improvement of the property. She has paid taxes. She has operated a legitimate agricultural enterprise. Dr. Lenora Marsh has agreed to serve as guardian ad litem until Miss Whitmore reaches full majority. He picked up his gavel. The property known as Shadow Creek Hollow belongs to Thea and Opal Whitmore. This case is closed. The gavel fell. The courtroom erupted. People were cheering, crying, embracing each other. The sound washed over me like a wave, like sunlight breaking through clouds, like everything I had been afraid to hope for suddenly becoming real. Opal was in my arms. Solomon was beside me, his weathered face wet with tears. Dr. Marsh was shaking hands with Mr. Pemberton, both of them smiling like they had just witnessed a miracle. But Judge Morrison was not finished. Furthermore, he said, his voice cutting through the celebration, I am ordering an investigation into Mr. Cornelius Blackwood's conduct regarding this and other property disputes in this county. The cheering stopped. Blackwood's face went gray. Several irregularities have come to my attention during the course of reviewing this case. Deeds that do not match county records. Witnesses who have changed their testimony under suspicious circumstances. Properties acquired under questionable circumstances over a period of 40 years. He looked at Blackwood with eyes that held no mercy. The county prosecutor will be notified. All of Mr. Blackwood's property transactions will be reviewed, and if the evidence supports criminal charges, they will be filed. Blackwood was shaking. His confident smile was gone. His mask of respectability had crumbled, revealing the fear underneath. This isn't over, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't. It is over, Mr. Blackwood. Judge Morrison's voice was final. 40 years of hatred, 40 years of scheming, 40 years of trying to destroy what a good woman built. He stood. It ends here. Today. Now. And then he did something that no one expected. He walked down from the bench, crossed the courtroom, and stopped in front of me. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was quiet. Meant only for me. For everything my father took from her. For every year she spent alone, knowing that the truth had been buried. For every letter that went unanswered. For every dream that was stolen. His eyes were wet. I cannot undo what he did, but I can make sure that Josephine Whitmore's name is cleared, that her patent is recognized, that her contribution to agricultural science is acknowledged. He held out his hand, and I can make sure that her great nieces keep the land she loved. I took his hand. She would have forgiven him, I said. She was that kind of person. Are you that kind of person? I thought about it, about Josephine's 45 years alone, about the letters that went unanswered, about the research that was stolen and the reputation that was destroyed, about Mrs. Grimshaw and her stamped denial, about Blackwood and his 40-year vendetta, about everyone who had tried to convince me that I was nothing. I'm trying to be, I said. Cornelius Blackwood never recovered from the public humiliation of the trial. The investigation revealed decades of fraud, forged deeds, intimidated witnesses. Families cheated out of their land through schemes so elaborate they took months to unravel. He was stripped of most of his holdings. Properties that had been in his name for decades were returned to their rightful owners. Money that had been stolen was where possible repaid. He died alone in the winter of 1944, in a boarding house in Louisville, far from the valley he had tried so hard to control. No one attended his funeral. No one mourned his passing. His grave was unmarked, and within a year, no one could remember exactly where it was. I did not attend his funeral, but I thought about him sometimes, about his 40 years of hatred, about the way he had let one rejection poison his entire life, about the energy he had spent on destruction when he could have built something of his own. He built his own cave, I told Opal once years later, a cave of bitterness and resentment, and he never found his way out. I was determined not to make the same mistake. 2 years after the trial in the spring of 1946, a car I did not recognize came up the hollow road. It was a gray sedan, dusty from travel, older than the cars that usually made it this far into the mountains. It stopped in the clearing and a woman stepped out. She was older than I remembered. Mid-60s now, with gray hair and a face that had aged badly. The steel that had once defined her had gone to rust. She looked like someone who had been carrying a heavy weight for too long and had finally been broken by it. It was Mrs. Grimshaw. I was on the porch when she arrived. Opal was in the cave checking the afternoon harvest. Solomon had passed away the year before peacefully in his chair by the fire, and I still found myself looking for him ever morning, still expecting to see his tall figure emerging from the trees at dawn. Mrs. Grimshaw stood beside her car, looking at the cabin, the cave entrance, the terraces on the hillside, looking at everything we had built in 8 years. She looked smaller than she had at Thornwood, smaller and older and somehow lost. "I came to apologize," she said when I approached. Her voice was different too, smaller, less certain, the voice of someone who was no longer sure she had the right to speak. "I read about you in the university bulletin, about the cave farm, about what you've done here." She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I realized I spent 20 years telling children they couldn't be anything, and you proved me wrong." I could have turned her away. I could have told her to leave. I could have reminded her of the letter she threw away, of the 7 years of suffering she caused, of the night she planned to send Opal to Tone in an asylum. I could have been angry, but I thought about Blackwood dying alone in a boarding house with nothing but his bitterness to keep him company. I thought about Judge Morrison spending his whole life trying to undo his father's wrongs. I thought about Josephine, who had been betrayed and stolen from and silenced, and who had spent her last years writing letters to children she had never met, filled with love and hope and the certainty that someday someone would understand. "Would you like to come inside?" I said. Mrs. Grimshaw stared at me. "I brought tea," I continued, "from herbs I grow in the cave, and bread I baked this morning." I opened the door. "Please," I said, "sit down." She sat at my table, the same table where I had first read Josephine's journal, the same table where I had planned our survival through that first terrible winter, the same table where I had received the news that we had won. I made tea. I set out bread and butter and honey from the hives we had started 2 summers ago. And we sat across from each other, the woman who had tried to break me and the woman I had become despite her. "Why did you do it?" I asked finally. "The letter, the denial. Why didn't you let her save us?" Mrs. Grimshaw's hands trembled around her teacup. "I was afraid," she said quietly, "afraid of what people would say if I let children go to a woman who lived alone in a cave. Afraid of being held responsible if something went wrong. Afraid of—" She stopped. "I was afraid of everything. My whole life I was afraid, and I dealt with that fear by controlling everyone around me, by making sure they were as small and scared as I was." She looked at me. "I told myself it was for your own good, that I was protecting you, that you would never amount to anything anyway, so it didn't matter where you were." Tears ran down her lined face. "I was wrong. About everything. About you. About your aunt. About what children can become when someone believes in them." She reached into her bag. "I found something. In the basement at Thornwood. It was there for years. I didn't know. I didn't look. She pulled out a wooden box. It was about the size of a shoebox, worn and weathered with age, made of cedar with a small brass latch that had gone green with oxidation. It was with the old files, the ones from before I arrived. Someone must have put it there years ago and forgotten about it." She set the box on the table between us. I think it was meant for you. I opened the box. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, bundled with ribbon, stacked carefully organized by year, each one addressed in the same careful handwriting I had come to know as well as my own. To my darling nieces, Thea and Opal Whitmore. I pulled one out at random. The paper was yellowed. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still clear. The letter was dated 1925. I would have been 5 years old. Opal would have been just born. My darling girls, it began. Another year has passed, and still I have not been able to reach you. But I write these letters anyway because I believe that someday you will read them. Someday you will find your way here, to the hollow, to the Guaymu, to the life I am preparing for you. I am describing in this letter a technique for extending the growing season by 2 weeks using thermal mass principles. The limestone walls of the cave absorb heat during the day and release it slowly at night, creating a buffer against temperature extremes. I pulled out another letter, 1929, the year we entered Thornwood. My darling girls, I have heard that you are now in an orphanage in Ohio. I have written to them asking if I might visit you, if I might send you gifts, if I might somehow let you know that you are not alone. They have not responded. But I keep writing. Because I believe in you, because I know that someday, somehow, we will find each other. In this letter, I am explaining the principles of mirror-based light redirection. The angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. Another letter, 1931, the year Josephine had written to adopt us. My darling girls, my request to take custody of you has been denied. They say I am unsuitable. They say I am unstable. They say I am not fit to raise children. They are wrong, but I cannot fight them. I am one woman alone in the mountains with no money and no influence, and no power to change what powerful people have decided. So instead, I will prepare. I will build. I will make this place ready for you so that when you finally come, and I believe you will come, everything will be waiting. In this letter, I am explaining the water channel system I have developed. The limestone acts as a natural filter. I read letter after letter, 16 years of letters, from 1921 when I was a baby to 1937, the year Josephine died. Each one teaching something, each one explaining a technique, a principle, a piece of the knowledge she had spent her life accumulating. Each one ending the same way: you are never alone. Even when you cannot see me, I am here. My love is in these walls. It is in the water. It is in the stone. It is in the light. Find me, my darlings. I am waiting for you. I have always been waiting for you. Opal came in from the cave while I was still reading. She saw the box. She saw my tear-stained face. She saw Mrs. Grimshaw small and broken at our table. "What is it?" she asked. I handed her a letter. She read it, and then she began to cry. Not from sadness, from the same overwhelming recognition that I had felt when I first saw the cave. The same certainty that had filled me when I opened Josephine's journal. We had been loved before we knew we existed. We had been wanted before we understood what wanting meant. Someone had been writing to us for 16 years, teaching us, preparing for us, believing in us. We were never alone. We never had been. I looked at Mrs. Grimshaw. She was crying too, silent tears running down her lined cheeks, her hands clasped in her lap, her shoulders bowed with the weight of everything she had done and failed to do. "I forgive you," I said. The words surprised me. I had not planned to say them, but they felt true. "Not because you deserve it," I continued, "but because I do. Because carrying anger is like carrying stones uphill. It exhausts you and you never reach the top." I stood and walked around the table. Josephine forgave everyone who wronged her. She had to, or she would have been consumed by bitterness. She chose to build instead of destroy. She chose to love instead of hate. I took Mrs. Grimshaw's hands in mine. "I choose the same thing. I choose to let go of what you did. I choose to remember that you were afraid, and afraid people do cruel things. I choose to believe that you can be better than you were." Mrs. Grimshaw looked at me with eyes that held decades of regret. "How," she whispered, "how can you forgive me after everything?" I thought about it. About Thornwood. About the cold oatmeal and the colder beds. About the letter stamp denied in the years we had lost. About the cave. About the journal. About the moonlight garden and everything it had taught me. Because forgiveness isn't about deserving, I said. It's about choosing what kind of person you want to be. And I want to be the kind of person Josephine was, the kind of person who builds instead of destroys, who loves instead of hates, who leaves the world better than she found it. I squeezed her hands. You can't change what you did, but you can choose what you do next. You can choose to be better. And I can choose to let you try, Mom. Mrs. Grimshaw left that evening. I never saw her again. I heard years later that she had retired from Thornwood, that she had spent her final years volunteering at a different orphanage, one that treated its children with kindness, that she had died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by people who had forgiven her long before she learned to forgive herself. I hope it was true. I hope she found peace. December 7th, 1941. I was in the cave when Opal came running down the path, her face white with shock. Pearl Harbor, she gasped. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. We're at war. Over the next months, the young men of Shadow Creek left for Europe and the Pacific. The valley emptied of its strongest workers. Food became scarce as the government bought everything for the troops. Rationing turned pantries into carefully guarded vaults. Gardens withered in the summer drought of 1942. The autumn harvest was the worst anyone could remember. Families who had eaten well for years found themselves hungry, uncertain, afraid. But the Moonlight Garden kept producing, 55 degrees year-round, indifferent to drought and frost and the desperate politics of wartime. The limestone wept its steady moisture. The mirrors caught their daily ration of light. The mushrooms grew in the dark chamber as they always had, patient and quiet and unstoppable. I did not raise prices, I lowered them. When families could not pay, I gave food away. I loaded baskets with greens and mushrooms and potatoes and carried them to doorsteps where pride would have kept people from asking. Solomon watched me load baskets for families who had once whispered about the witch's niece. You're feeding the same people who would have let you starve, he said. I know, I said. That's why it matters. He came to the hollow every day until the end. Solomon Hayes died in the spring of 1952. He was 90 years old, though no one knew exactly. Born enslaved in Georgia, free for 60 years. He had lived longer than most people thought possible for a man who had started life as property. He died peacefully in his chair by the fire, with a bowl of mushroom soup still warm on the table beside him. I found him in the morning when I came to bring him breakfast, as I did every day. His eyes were closed, his face was calm. He looked like a man who had finished his work and was finally resting. He left me a letter. I was too old to have children of my own. But you and Opal were the closest thing to family I had in 60 years. Josephine asked me to take care of you. I hope I did all right. Take care of this hollow. Take care of each other. And remember what she taught us both. In the darkness, we find our truest light. We buried him on the ridge above the hollow, the same ridge where he used to sit and watch the sunset, where he could look down and see the cabin, the cave, the terraces on the hillside. Everything he had helped us build. I planted wildflowers on his grave, mountain laurel and rhododendron, things that would bloom every spring for as long as the mountain stood. Every year on the anniversary of his death, Opal and I climbed that ridge and sat with him. We told him about the harvest, about the students we were teaching, about the changes in the valley and the world. We told him he was not forgotten. We told him he never would be. Ruth Holloway came to the hollow in the autumn of 1943. She was 25 years old. A nurse recently returned from a field hospital in France. Her left arm hung at an angle that suggested old injury badly healed. Her face bore the kind of weariness that comes from seeing too much death and still choosing to live. She had heard we might have work. I hired her that afternoon. She understood the cave the way Solomon had understood it, not as a limitation but as a possibility. She saw the mirrors and immediately suggested improvements. She designed a pulley system for moving heavy baskets. She built better frames for the raised beds. But more than that, she understood me. She understood my stubbornness, my need to prove myself, my fierce love for my sister, my grief for the aunt I had never met and the mentor I had lost. She understood that I had spent my whole life being told I was nothing and that I had decided to become something anyway. I introduced her to my brother Thomas, a quiet man who had returned from the Pacific with wounds that did not show. They married in 1947, he died in 1958, and Ruth stayed on the mountain helping with the garden until her own death in 1978. I married James Caldwell in 1948. He was a school teacher from Millbrook. A gentle man who loved books and understood that my work came first, who never tried to control me or change me or make me smaller than I was. We had 3 children. The first we named Josephine after the woman who had loved us across time and death. The second we named Lenora after Dr. Marsh, who had saved Opal's life and helped us win our case. The third we named Solomon after the man who had kept his promise across decades. They grew up in the hollow. They learned to tend the cave. They carried the knowledge forward to their own children and their children's children. The Moonlight Garden became the Josephine Whitmore Agricultural Center in 1965, a place where students came to learn about underground cultivation, about sustainable farming, about the woman who had spent 45 years proving that life could grow anywhere if you understood how to help it. By 1980, more than 600 students had passed through our program. They came from all over, from Kentucky and Tennessee and Ohio, from New York and California, and places whose names I had only read in books. They came because they had heard about the key, about the woman who had built it, about the system that produced food in darkness, while the world outside struggled with drought and frost and the unpredictable violence of weather. They came to learn, and we taught them. It is 1989. I am 69 years old now. The world has changed in ways I could never have imagined when I was 18, standing in a drafty hallway while Mrs. Grimshaw planned to send my sister to die. Television, computers, men walking on the moon. Things that would have seemed like magic to the girl. I was the girl who stole books from donation bins and dreamed of a life beyond cold oatmeal and cruelty. But some things have not changed. The cave still holds steady at 55 degrees. The limestone still weeps its steady moisture. The mirrors still catch the light and bounce it into the darkness. And every morning when I walk through those chambers, I feel Josephine beside me. Not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a presence. As alive and real as the plants growing in the stone beds, as the water flowing through the channels, as the soft glow of reflected light on ancient walls. Opal is 64 now. Her hair is gray, her face is lined with years, but her breathing is still clear and strong. 51 years of living near that cave, and her lungs have never failed her again. She runs the teaching program now. Welcomes the students, explains the systems, carries Josephine's knowledge forward to another generation. We sit together on the cabin porch in the evenings, the same porch where Solomon used to tell us stories, where Ruth and I planned the expansion, where my children took their first steps. We hold hands, our fingers rough and calloused from 5 decades of working in the dirt. Do you remember what Josephine wrote? Opal asks sometimes. That first line in the journal? I always remember. They will tell you that nothing grows in the dark, I say. They are wrong. The dark is where all seeds begin. And it is true. In the darkness of that cave, we found light. In the silence of those mountains, we found our voices. In the loneliness of being unwanted, we found family. Not the family we were born into, but the family we built, the family we chose. Solomon, Dr. Marsh, Ruth, the women who helped us rebuild, the students who came and learned and went out into the world carrying pieces of our knowledge in their hearts. All of them, all of us, family. If you are listening to this story, I want to ask you something. What cave have you been standing outside of? What sealed door have you been too afraid to open? What did someone tell you about yourself that you believed that you were nothing, that you came from nothing, that you would amount to nothing? And what would happen if you decided today, right now, that they were wrong? Because here is what 51 years have taught me. You do not need perfect conditions. You do not need bright light. You do not need permission from people who do not love you. You do not need to be ready. You just need to begin. One seed, one question, one step into the darkness. That is all it takes. The dark is where all seeds begin. And if this story moved something in you, if it made you think about your own sealed caves and rusted keys, then I want you to do something for me. Think about the people who loved you before you knew they existed, the grandparents who dreamed of you, the ancestors who worked and struggled and survived so that you could be here today. You are the product of 1,000 love stories you will never know. You carry in your blood the hopes and dreams of people who never met you but loved you anyway. Remember that, especially on the days when you feel alone. You are not alone. You never were. Your cave is waiting. Open the door.